Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. When we get started here in a second, we're going to start at chapter 36. So. Yeah. So chapter 36 we're going to start. Thank you to everybody for picking through the rubble to be here.
My favorite part is now they got these folding chairs.
Yeah, there's folding chairs. I don't know what the folding chairs are there for.
That was a nice touch. If people just want to sit there.
Well, I guess you could have a picnic lunch and just kind of watch and sip some iced tea. And,
Folding chairs. I thought maybe found one.
That was always the joke when I was growing up in California. It was Caltrans. That was the Department of Transportation. Yeah. Is that there'd always be one guy working and three guys leaning on shovels. You know, they sort of take turns.
I stuck that every year.
Well, the whole state of West Virginia government.
Yeah. Okay, so by way of quick introduction, because again, you could go and look at the first, or listen to, I guess you could stare at it too, but it would be boring. You could listen to the first lecture on Wisdom of Ben-Sirach, aka Ecclesiasticus, on the website. But, so introduction. This book was written by Yeshua, which is either Joshua or Jesus Ben-Sirach, son of Sirach, around 190 BC. It's a collection of his wisdom. So as we've seen, it sort of shifts a little in sort of genre. There's parts of it that are just sort of collected sayings all put together. There's parts of it that are sort of longer pieces. As we come closer to the end of the book tonight, it's going to shift a little more. It's going to start out with sort of what we've been used to the last couple of Bible studies, but then as we get toward the end, there's going to be a shift, but we'll talk about that when we get there. As we said, it's known as Ecclesiasticus, or the church book, because it was used in the early church for people who are newly become Christians as a way to teach them how to now live a Christian life, how to live their life as a Christian going forward. So did anybody have any questions or anything left over from previous? Okay. We'll go ahead and start chapter 36. Have mercy on us, O Lord, the God of all, and look upon us, and put your fear on all the nations. Raise your hand against foreign nations, and let them see your power. As in us you have been sanctified before them, so in them may you be made great before us. Now notice there, remember what we've said, the purpose of Israel, the purpose of God choosing Israel in the Old Testament was not that they were somehow better than all the other nations, but that they were to be an example, right, to all the other nations. They received the law, they were supposed to follow it, so the other nations would see it, want to be like them, and would come to worship God as well. So that's, in verse 3, that as in us you have been sanctified before them. And, historically, but the idea being, we've
even today hasn't changed.
Right. We've tried to show, to reflect your holiness to them. Right? He says, so in them may you be made great before us. Right? Show your power to them so that we can see and give glory to your greatness. Let them know you as we also have known you, for there is no God but you, O Lord. Now we have to keep that in mind. He says, put your fear on all the nations. And it sounds like he's saying, enough with us being oppressed, go, time to go put the smack down on all these people oppressing us. But what's he actually saying? Put your fear on them. What does it mean? Bring them the fear of the Lord. Right? Let them know you as we have known you. Right? So what he's really asking for, right, out of this judgment that he wants against the nations, is not that they be destroyed and perish and all go to hell, right? But that God would bring judgment against them in order to convert them, in order to bring them to worshiping the true God. Verse 5, renew your signs and work fresh wonders. Glorify your hand and your right arm. Stir up your anger and pour out your wrath. Drive away the adversary and destroy the enemy. Hasten the time and remember your oath, and let people declare your mighty works. Let him who survives be devoured in your fiery wrath, and may those who harm your people meet destruction. Crush the heads of the rulers of the enemies who say, there is no one but us. Gather together all the tribes of Jacob, and grant them their inheritances from the beginning. Have mercy upon your people called by your name, O Lord, upon Israel whom you have likened to your firstborn son. Have pity on the city of your sanctuary, Jerusalem, the place of your rest. Fill Zion with the celebration of your divine virtue, and your people with your glory. Give testimony to what you created in the beginning, and raise up the prophecies spoken in your name. Reward those who wait for you, and let your prophets be found trustworthy. Hear, O Lord, the prayer of your suppliants, according to the blessing of Aaron over your people. And all on earth will know that you are the Lord, the God of the ages. Right? So we come back to that idea at the end. Why does he want God to restore Israel? Bring Israel back together, glorify Israel, so that all the other nations will know that he is God and come to worship him as well. And this pattern is important because we're going to see this as we get into the prophets in the next few weeks. Right? We've talked about a little bit about the day of the Lord. There's this time that's going to come when God's going to visit his people and there's going to be judgment. Right? Also, in the prophets, there's this idea that when this happens, and when Israel is restored or Israel is glorified or the Messiah comes, however the individual prophet describes that, that's going to mean that the rest of the nations are going to come and worship God as well. We're going to see that develop as a pattern, and that's what he's referring to here. That those two things are connected. And the reason that's important is that's incredibly important when we get to the New Testament here in a couple of years. And we start talking about St. Paul. Because what St. Paul sees when he sees that the Messiah has come, right? The Messiah has come. There's been this reckoning for Israel, right? There's been this judgment. So in terms of the way the prophets laid things out, what time is it? Well, St. Paul says it's time for all the nations to come to worship the true God. And so he goes out to the Gentiles to start bringing them in. Right? It's not this change that suddenly happens in the New Testament. Right? It's the fulfillment of what we see in the Old Testament. Right? Now you'll notice among modern Zionists of the Jewish persuasion, this connection has been broken. Right? They've got their own country now, right? Have they made any effort to try to get the rest of the nations to come and worship Yahweh, their God? No.
Only if you're Jewish.
Right. There's been no effort to
bring the Gentiles.
Right, to bring the Gentiles. They've lost this. In fact, verse 9, right? What is the mark of an enemy of a nation that's an enemy of God? Is they say there's no one but us. Right? There's no one but us. And so this is, again, when we get into the New Testament and we're reading the Gospels, this is the twist that takes place. They're expecting God to visit his people. They're expecting there to be judgment. But the judgment they're expecting is that they're going to be the good guys. Right? They're going to be the good guys, and the Romans and whoever else, they're the bad guys. And they're going to get theirs, and we're going to get rewarded. And what ends up happening when that judgment comes, right, is it's Judea, it's Jerusalem that gets destroyed. Right, because they reject their Messiah. Right? That part gets flipped. Right? And so, but we've already seen going on, remember, all the way back in Deuteronomy. All the way back in Deuteronomy, where God said, was talking about how they wouldn't believe, how he knew they weren't going to believe, they weren't going to follow the law he'd just given them. And he gets to the end and he says, your life will hang before your eyes and you will not recognize it. So already that far back. It wasn't a surprise to God, it was a surprise to the Jews. But it wasn't a surprise to God that flip happened. But so this is important. This idea that the day of the Lord is accompanied by the Gentiles coming to faith. Right, is really important. We're going to see it. We're going to see it all through Isaiah. We're going to see it all through a whole bunch of the prophets as we get into them. But that's the whole idea, that once that judgment happens, that Israel is going to accomplish its task, the task it had in the first place, which was bringing the whole world to worship God. So verse 18, the stomach eats any kind of food, but some food is better than others. As the palate tastes the flavor of game, so an understanding heart detects lying words. A crooked heart will cause grief, but a man with great experience will pay him back. A woman will accept any son, but one daughter is better than another. Well, that's kind of strange, right? Wait a minute. Well, the idea there is we have to go back to this point in history, right? 190 BC, right? You wanted to have a son, why? Well, because the son would inherit, right? Would inherit and continue the family line, right? So, even if he wasn't that great looking, even if he wasn't that sharp, at least you had an heir, right? At least you had an heir. At least the family line would continue. On the other hand, when you had a daughter, right? Now you got to try and arrange a marriage, right? Now you got to try and arrange a dowry, right? You've got to try and get her set up, and so sometimes that would be more difficult, and sometimes that would be less difficult, depending on the daughter you had. So that's what that's getting at.
You didn't have to go back to 190 BC.
Well,
You just have to go back to my pastor here in St. George and believe some of the old-time women, you know. So there was a girl coming. It was not a happy time. It was one of those boys coming. I will not name names. That'll be in my book. To be
posthumously.
Posthumously published after my death.
Now I was gonna work to get you made a saint, and that book's gonna ruin it.
Because if it's published before, I will be dead.
Case in point, my parents, Diane was not the person they picked for me. So it was so when we got married. But when Kevin was born, they became more like him.
There was Richard came along, and each subsequent son. You're right.
Our son-in-law did real good.
Yes. So verse 22, a beautiful woman gladdens a man's face and surpasses his every desire. If there is mercy and gentleness on her tongue, her husband is not like other men. He who gains a wife gets his best possession, a helper like himself and a pillar of support. Where there is no wall, the property will be plundered, and where a man has no wife, he will wander around and groan. Who will trust a well-equipped thief who skips from city to city? Who will trust a man who has no home and lodges wherever night overtakes him? So we have to remember that we read last time about how bad it is if you have a wife who's not so virtuous. You have to take that into account with this. Right? If you have a spouse who is virtuous, then you've got the greatest thing you could possibly have. Chapter 37, every friend will say, I too am your friend, but sometimes a friend is a friend in name only. Is it not a grief to the death when a companion and friend turns to hatred? O evil reasoning, why were you involved to cover the land with deceit? A companion delights in the gladness of a friend, but in time of affliction he will be against him. A companion labors to help a friend for his stomach's sake, and in a time of battle he will take up the shield. Do not forget a friend in your soul, and do not be unmindful of him with your wealth. Every counselor extols his own counsel, and some offer advice in their own interest. So So everyone who wants to give you advice thinks they have the best advice. Right? Verse 8, protect yourself from a counselor and know beforehand what is his interest. For he will take thought for himself, lest he cast his vote against you, and say to you, your path is good. Then he will stand aside to see what will happen to you. Do not consult with a man who looks at you suspiciously, and hide your counsel from those who envy you. Also, do not consult with a woman about her rival, nor with a coward about battle, nor with a merchant about exchange, nor with a buyer about selling, nor with a slanderer about gratitude, nor with an unmerciful man about generosity, nor with an idler about any work, nor with a seasonal hired hand about completing his work, nor with a lazy servant about a big job. Pay no attention to these in any counsel. Instead, persevere with a godly man who you know keeps the commandments, whose soul accords with your soul, and will share in your suffering if you fall. Stand firm on the counsel of your heart, for no one is more faithful to you than it. For a man's soul sometimes tells him more than 7 watchmen sitting high on a watchtower. And in all matters pray to the Most High, that he may direct your way in truth. Verse 16, a word is the beginning of every work, and counsel comes before every action. 4 types of things appear as a clue to a change of heart: good and evil, life and death, and it is the tongue that continually rules them. There is an astute man who is a teacher of many, but is useless to his own soul. A man who devises words craftily will be hated. This man will go hungry. For grace was not given to him from the Lord, because he is destitute of all wisdom. There is a man wise in his own soul, and the fruits of his understanding are trustworthy when he speaks. A wise man will instruct his own people, and the fruits of his understanding are trustworthy. A wise man shall be filled with blessing, and all who see him will consider him blessed. The life of a man is numbered by days, but the days of Israel are without number. The wise man will inherit trust among his people, and his name will live forever. There's that in verse 19, there's an astute man who's a teacher of many, but is useless to his own soul. St. Paul kind of refers back to that when he talks about how he continues to press on in his struggles, lest he, having preached to many, right, having preached to others, fail to save himself. Verse 27, my son, while you are still living, test your soul and see what is bad for it, and do not give in to that. For not everything is profitable for everyone, and not every soul enjoys everything. Another reference St. Paul makes, remember he says, everything is permissible, not everything is beneficial. Right. You can do whatever you want, but not everything is helpful. Do not be gluttonous for every dainty food, and do not give yourself over to food. For overeating will bring sickness, and gluttony will lead to nausea. Many have died because of gluttony, but the careful man will prolong his life. So chapter 8, we'll dedicate this chapter to Nick.
Oh, I thought you were going to gluttony.
No. No. That would be dedicated to me. No, this one. No, this coming chapter, not what we just read. We need to get you a cross stitch of a few verses here for your office. Chapter 38. Honor the physician with the honor due him, and also according to your need of him, for the Lord created him. Healing comes from the Most High, and he will receive a gift from the King. The physician's skill will lift up his head, and he shall be admired in the presence of the great. The Lord created medicines from the earth, and a sensible man will not loathe them. Is not water made sweet by wood, that its strength might be known? What is that referring to? That's weird. That's referring to back in Exodus.
When
They had the bitter, they're at the waters of Mara, the bitter water, and Moses threw the wood in. Why is he bringing that up? Right? Well, God could have just made the water sweet, right? But why the wood? Because he's making the point, God works through material things. Right? And so he's talking about healing, right? God works through physicians and medicines. That's why he says, the Lord created medicines from the earth, and a sensible man will not loathe them. Right?
model in you.
Well, Christian scientists are like the grape nuts of religion. They're neither Christian nor scientists. So, they're really, I mean, not only would they not be reading this particular book of the Bible, but their whole belief is based on the idea that before the fall into sin, human beings were immaterial beings. And so they believe that our souls are still immaterial. And they believe that this world that we're in is an illusion. And the reason we believe it's real is that we're sinful. So they believe if you have enough faith, then there's really no injuries and no sickness, and none of that is real. Now, the guy who explained this to me at the Christian Science reading room was wearing glasses. So I don't know how literally to take it. But so he must not have had a lot of faith. But this is really one of the important touchstones in Orthodox Christianity that makes it, not the only, but makes it real Christianity. Right? When St. John wants to give us a test, right? When he's talking about testing the spirits, right? The way you tell a spirit that's from God is from a spirit that isn't, right? So the way you tell a Christian idea or a Christian thought from a non-Christian thought is any spirit that confesses that Christ came in the flesh is from God, and anyone that doesn't isn't. And by that he means exactly this. Christ became man in this world, physical. You could touch him. Flesh and bone, the material. Okay? Any form of religion that denies the material world, denies that it's real, says that it's all evil, right? Is not Christianity. Is not Christianity. And so various forms of Christianity have gone astray into that kind of thinking. We've talked before when we talked about the resurrection. Right? The Christian teaching on the resurrection of the dead has always been clear. That the dead, all of them, are raised on the last day on this earth. Right? Our bodies, our physical bodies are raised again. We are in them again. Right? And we are judged. And that we hope to go on to live in the new heavens and the new earth with Christ. Now, despite that being totally clear historically and totally clear scripturally, how often do we hear various forms of Christianity talk about we die, our soul leaves our body, and we go to heaven or hell? And that's it.
And that's it.
Or the rapture.
Well, that's not properly speaking Christianity.
But you sure have a lot of people believe.
Christianity teaches we're resurrected out of this world. Teaches that this world is real and is good and that God works through material things. That's why iconography is so important. That's why relics are so important to our faith, is that they're testaments to that. That's why the Theotokos is so important. She gave birth to an actual baby, and that actual baby is God. Now, she didn't give birth to in some spiritual sense. She isn't some angelic being. She's a human being. Gave birth to a human baby who is God.
And the incarnate Christ that sits at the right hand of God, our physical being is at the right hand.
Right. So that, again and again and again, all these things in our faith reconnect us to the reality of the incarnation of Christ. And so that's what this is connected to too. And various forms of, and so this is, I mean, the most obvious deviation being Platonism, the philosophy, where the material is Lois, the Aristotle, matter is basically evil. Right? It's chaos and evil. And these are all views that are opposed to Christianity and what we say about the creation. God created everything and he created it good. That we've mucked it up, but he's going to fix it. He's not going to get rid of it, he's going to fix it. So that's a basic divider between Christianity and Hinduism, Christianity and Buddhism, Christianity and false forms of Christianity. It's a basic dividing point. Yeah.
I have to go back to a couple of weeks ago when you mentioned I'm going to paraphrase it, something about spirituality. And beware of those people who say, I had this vision, I saw this, and this. Yet in Christianity, okay, by the very word it says itself, we are instructed to test the spirits.
Right.
We are taught that we are in a spiritual warfare. Now, spiritual does not have any physical part. We are the physical part. So therefore, we're looking at two types of universes. Would you agree that one can interact with the other?
Strictly speaking, I got 2 points I have to make here. Number one, material and immaterial isn't the terminology that Christianity is traditionally used. The language we've traditionally used is from in the Nicene Creed, is visible and invisible. Visible and invisible. Second point I need to make is about St. Gregory Palamas in the 15th century. St. Gregory Palamas, who's considered, he's sort of lumped in with the church fathers, even though he lived a long time after the rest of the church fathers. But the main debate he had with Barlaam of Calabria was about precisely this point. Because Barlaam of Calabria, who later, after he kind of got thrown out of Greece,
Who was it?
oh, I'll get there in a second. Yeah, we got thrown out of Greece. He went and became a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church. They received him happily. Okay, after he lost out on 3 heresy trials in the East. But this was the debate, because Barlaam was teaching essentially a form of rationalism. Right? That God is immaterial, but he's a rational being. Right? And so that the way we come to know God and understand God, and even if we use the term see God, right, is intellectually. It's through an intellectual assent. Right? Whereas St. Gregory Palamas argued, no, when people are given visions of God, when St. Paul gets knocked off his horse and sees Christ, right, he's seeing Christ with his physical eyes. He's not having a mental apparition. Right? He's seeing Christ with his physical eyes. Okay? And because he's seeing Christ with his physical eyes, that means it doesn't matter if you're the world's greatest Bible scholar or if you're an illiterate monk praying in a cave. Right? You're on the same footing in terms of the knowledge of God. So I have to make that point in terms of the testing of the spirits. That's sort of what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. Was the fathers tell us if you have a vision of an angel who tells you something, you doubt it, you test it. You don't just go in assuming it's true and it's real. Right? You go in assuming it's false. You assume it's trying to deceive you. Right? And if God has a message he wants to get to you, he'll get it to you. Right? Despite that. Yeah.
Okay, 3 good points, okay, that I'd like to bring up. First, St. Paul, he writes, I do not know if I was in the spirit or in the flesh. We talked about this.
Right.
I attained the seventh heaven. That one. Second,
Third
St.
heaven,
John.
but yeah.
I'm going
Yeah.
to. Second, St. John, the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
I was in the spirit.
Right.
Okay. And here is the voice that I saw.
Right.
3, because you see Christ or any of us sees Christ, that does not necessarily mean we are on equal footing, because because it depends on the situation. Christ coming to carry our soul, Christ watching us die, or Christ appearing before us saying, like Paul, why do you crucify? Why do you persecute me?
But in any of those three cases, intellect isn't required.
Right.
No.
No.
Cognitive intellect is not.
Right.
No, it is, your intellect is over all of your. It's like flipping a coin in physics. If that coin doesn't come down, then all of the laws of physics change. All of the laws of spirituality, as we understand them and try to describe the Holy Spirit, if you will, we cannot possibly comprehend a spirit going across the body of water, creating the earth, creating the seas, like that. I don't think we can comprehend that.
No,
The
well,
spirit
no.
moves.
But there's an important thing we have to point out here in terms of spirituality.
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the two examples you gave of in the Spirit. Okay. Both of those are references to the Holy Spirit,
Yes.
not just like their spirit,
Yes.
right?
Joining to
Right, that the Holy Spirit is in them.
revelation knowledge
Right.
is revelation knowledge.
Right.
You know that you know that you know.
Right, right. But my point being, when St. John, and we'll get there in a few years, when St. John, more soon in the next couple of months, we'll get to Isaiah, when Isaiah is standing in heaven.
Right.
Right. Much more soon. Okay, when Isaiah is standing in heaven, right? Clearly, he's in the Spirit, right?
Yes.
He's seeing things that are invisible to other people.
Yes.
Okay, but he is seeing them and experiencing them as his self,
He's not
as his,
outside.
as his embodied human self. And we're going to see he's going to touch things, and things are going to touch him, right?
Is he not the one who sees that there are other Israelites alive and he thought he was the only one?
That's Elijah,
Elijah. Look, I'm sorry.
different prophet.
And look at what God
But remember, we already read about Elisha's servant. Remember? When they were all alone and the armies are coming and he's like, what are we going to do? Right? And his eyes are open and he sees the hosts of the Lord. Right? It's not that he's having a vision or the hosts of the Lord weren't there. It's that there was something that was invisible to him. There was something that he didn't see that now he sees. And so that's
spiritual, is it not?
Visibility.
yes, but the reason I want to stick close to those terms is because the word spiritual gets used to mean all kinds of things. Now,
Especially today.
with New Age, spiritual could be
I'm not
Religious,
religious,
I'm
but I'm
spiritual.
spiritual.
spiritual could just woo. I mean, I don't know what that means all the time.
No clue what
I had a spiritual experience. Well, what does that necessarily? I mean,
that is. It's smoke.
so that's why I want to really narrow in on certain terms, like visible and invisible and that kind of thing.
I had a spiritual experience. I was dead for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
They left my hospital.
Yeah.
Medically proven.
But there are other people who will go and they sing 20 choruses in a row and stand lock-kneed for 45 minutes.
It's latent.
And then they'll say, oh, I had a spiritual experience. Right?
No, I've
That's what I'm
found
saying.
that
That's the word spirit. I mean, so I like to define terms carefully.
I think what a lot of people are saying is they can't define it.
Yeah.
It's almost like an intuition.
Right. And so I just want to define terms carefully. I'm not trying to argue with you or say you're wrong about something. I'm just trying to define the terms carefully,
Not arguing.
so that we are all clear on what we're talking about.
So are we supposed to take that to mean that whenever any of the saints like talk about having visions, or when they were in one place and they saw something that was going on far away, that they actually saw it with their physical eyes?
Yeah. So that's, yeah. Yeah. Okay. But so here, back to our praise of Nick. So doctors, good. Medicine, good. Verse 6, he gave skill to men that he might be glorified in his wonders. By them he heals and takes away pain, a druggist making a compound of them. God's works are never finished, and from him health is upon the face of the earth. Right? God's works are never finished. It's not like he created the world and then he was done and he sat back and, right? He continues to bring life and health to the earth. Verse 9, my son, do not be negligent when you are sick, but pray to the Lord and he will heal you. Depart from transgression and direct your hands aright, and cleanse your heart from every sin. Offer a sweet-smelling sacrifice and a memorial of the finest wheat flour, and pour oil on your offering as if you are soon to die. And keep in touch with your physician, for the Lord created him. And do not let him leave you, for you need him. There is a time when success is also in their hands. For they will pray to the Lord to give them success in bringing relief and healing for the sake of preserving your life. He who sins before the one who made him, may he fall into the hands of a physician. So, you see, it's both and. Right? When you're sick, what do? Well, if you've been sinning, you confess. Right? You confess, you repent, you get it straightened out. You pray to the Lord for healing. And you go to your doctor. Right? And you trust that your doctor will also be praying to the Lord, that the Lord will guide him in helping you. It's both and. Right? The whole thing. It's a holistic approach. Verse 16, my son, let your tears fall for the dead, and as one suffering grievously begin the lament. With the honor due him, wrap his body and take care of his burial. Weep bitterly and lament fervently. Do your mourning according to what he deserves. For a day or two to avoid slander, then be comforted for your grief. For grief is a cause of death, and a grief-stricken heart will sap your strength. Grief also abides in misery, and the life of a poor man weighs down his heart. Do not give your heart to grief. Drive it away, remembering the end of life. Do not forget, for there is no coming back, and you cannot help the dead man by grieving, but will only injure yourself. Remember my end, since yours is also like it. Mine yesterday, yours today. When the dead man is at rest, let his remembrance cease, and be comforted for him in the exodus of his spirit. So, verse 22 there, that part in quotes is, I guess, what Yeshua Ben-Sirach would want on his tombstone. Mine yesterday, yours today. Nice and bleak. But the idea being, you know, when someone we love dies, we mourn. It's not wrong to mourn. Right? It's not wrong to mourn and be sad, to take care of their burial, right? But as we're gonna hear from St. Peter, you don't mourn the way the world mourns. You don't grieve the way, because we're not hopeless. We know, right? That's what we refer to exodus of his spirit. We know this isn't the end for them. And so we grieve for them for a time, but we don't let that grief overwhelm us and take over our lives and destroy us. Right? Because, as he says, that isn't helping the person who's gone. It's just destroying you. Verse 24, the wisdom of a scribe depends on his opportunity for quiet, for when he has little business he will be made wise. How will he who handles the plow be made wise? For he boasts in the shaft of the goad, and he drives oxen and is occupied with their labors, and his talk is about young bulls. His heart is set on plowing furrows, and he keeps watch to feed his heifers. The same is true for every craftsman and architect who works by night as well as by day. Those who engrave the signets of seals, he is diligent to make great variety. his heart set on creating a lifelike image and keeping watch to perfect his work. So too is the blacksmith sitting near the anvil, examining closely his ironworks. The breath of the fire melting his flesh as he struggles with the heat of the furnace. He inclines his ear to the sound of the hammer, and his eyes are focused on the likeness of the object. He sets his heart on the completion of his works and keeps watch to perfect its detail. The potter as well, sitting by his work and turning the potter's wheel with his feet. He is always careful about the quality of his work and also the quantity of his output. With his arm he molds the clay, and with his feet he curves it. His heart is set on finishing the glazing, and he is careful to clean the furnace. All these trust in their hands, and each is skilled in his work. Without them a city will not be livable, nor will anyone sojourn or live there. Yet they will not be sought out for the counsel of the people, and they will not gain prominence in the assembly. They do not sit in the judge's seat, nor will they understand the sentence of judgment. They cannot give instruction in discipline or judgment, nor will they be found using parables. But they will keep the fabric of the world stable, and their prayer is in the practice of their craft. So what's he saying? He's giving examples. There's all these other trades, right, in the city that you need to have, or that you needed to have at that time, right? You have blacksmiths, you have potters, you have people engraving signets, you have farmers. They're all concentrated on their work, right? They spend all their, the farmer's out there, he's keeping track of his livestock, he's preparing to plant, he's preparing to harvest. They're focused, they're consumed with it, right? He's saying, if you want to understand God's law, if you want to understand God's word, if you want to draw close to God and come to know God, you have to give it the same kind of attention, right? You have to give it the same kind of attention. So this is what he's saying at the beginning. The wisdom of the scribe depends on his opportunity for quiet. For when he has little business, he will be made wise. Right? When we're so distracted by busy all the time, right? We could say, oh yeah, I really want to pursue drawing closer to God. I really want to pursue my Christian life. That's what I'm really all about. But unless we actually set aside the time and the attention, right? Same kind of time and attention that a craftsman does with another craft, we're not going to have any kind of success. For the same reason that if you were a blacksmith and you spent 20 minutes a day blacksmithing, you would not be a very successful blacksmith. Right? Well, if you want to be a man or woman of prayer and you only spend 20 minutes a day praying, that's what it's getting at. Chapter 39, how different is the man who devotes himself to the study of the law of the Most High. He will seek out the wisdom of all the ancients and be occupied with their prophecies. He will preserve the discourse of notable men and penetrate the subtleties of parables. He will seek out the hidden meanings of proverbs and be engaged in the riddles of parables. He will serve in the midst of great men and will appear before rulers. He will travel through the land of foreign nations and test the good and evil among men. He will give his heart to rising early before the Lord who created him, and will make supplication to the Most High. He will open his mouth in prayer and make supplication for his sins. If the great Lord wills, he will be filled with the spirit of understanding. He will pour forth words of his wisdom, and in prayer he will give thanks to the Lord. He will direct his counsel and knowledge aright, and he will reflect on his hidden things. He will reveal instruction in his teaching and boast in the law of the Lord's covenant. Many will praise his understanding, and it will never be blotted out. His memory will not disappear, and his name will live through all generations. Nations will proclaim his wisdom, and the assembly will proclaim his praise. If he lives long, he will leave a name greater than 1,000. And if he goes to his rest, his work is completed. So, again, not only is it a similar path to being a craftsman, but as opposed to a craftsman, how many blacksmiths, right? No matter how great a blacksmith they were, how many blacksmiths have gone down through history, right? Whereas the saints, a couple of whom were blacksmiths actually, but you look at the saints and their memories that go on forever. Verse 12, now we're entering into a section. Well, I'll come back to that. Put that on pause. Verse 12, I have yet more to tell, and I will describe it in detail. For I am filled like a full moon. So hear me, O holy sons, and bud forth like a rose. springing up by a running stream, like frankincense amid a sweet fragrance, and blossom forth like a lily. Send forth a fragrance and sing a hymn of praise. Bless the Lord in all his works. Ascribe majesty to his name and give thanks to him in praise, with songs on your lips and with lyres. And thus you shall say in thanksgiving, all things are the works of the Lord, for they are exceedingly good, and every command shall be in his appointed time. No one can say, what is this, why is that? For every question will be answered in his appointed time. By his word the waters stood as a heap, and the reservoirs of the waters by the word of his mouth. By his command all his good pleasure is done, and no one will diminish his salvation. The works of all flesh are before him, and nothing can be hidden from his eyes. From age to age he looks upon them, and nothing is marvelous to him. No one can say, what is this, why is that? For all things were created for their uses. His blessing covers the dry land like a river, and drenches it like a flood. As he turns fresh waters into salt, so the heathen will inherit his wrath. As his ways are straight to the holy, so they are an occasion of stumbling to the lawless. As from the beginning good things were created for the good, so evil things for sinners. The basic needs of a man's life are water, fire, iron, salt, and wheat flour, and milk, honey, the blood of the grape, olive oil, and clothing. As all these things are good for the godly, so they turn into evil for sinners. There are spirits created for vengeance, and in his anger they strengthen their scourges. In the time of consummation they will pour out their might and appease the wrath of him who made them. Fire, hail, famine, and death, all these things are created for vengeance. The teeth of wild animals, scorpions and snakes, and the avenging sword that drives the ungodly to destruction. They shall be glad at his commandment, be prepared for his service on the earth, and when their times come they will not transgress his word. Therefore from the beginning I was determined and resolved, and left this in writing. All the works of the Lord are good, and he will supply every need in its hour. No one can say, this is worse than that, for all things will be well-pleasing in their time. So now sing praise with all your heart and voice, and bless the name of the Lord. Okay, so he lapses into this sort of, it's basically a psalm, right? It's basically a psalm. And what's interesting about it, I mean, we've seen a lot of the giving thanks to God for his works, and the works of his creation being good. The interesting part, at least to me, is this part about judgment and the way he characterizes judgment. Right? The way he characterizes judgment. So, for example, verse 23, as he turns fresh waters into salt, so the heathen will inherit his wrath. Okay. What does it mean, turns fresh water into salt? Well, rivers are mostly fresh water. They flow into the sea is salt. So this is how he's describing the way that leads to destruction. Right? You're in a river, it's fresh water, flows into, in this case, destruction. Right? Flows into wrath. That's where it leads. That's where it carries you once you go down that road. And then verse 26, the basic needs of a man's life: water, fire, iron, salt, wheat flour, milk, honey, the blood of the grape, olive oil, clothing. Right? All these things are good. These things that were created. And for those who are following God, they're all blessings. Right? But these exact same things, verse 27, turn into evil for sinners. Right? Meaning they make them an end in themselves. Right? They use food as an occasion for gluttony. Right? They use wealth for greed. Right? They take iron and use it to make a weapon and use it to and carry out their wrath. Right? These same good things that God created, evil people take them and twist them. Right? And so they end up inheriting the consequences of their actions, which is the fire, the hail, the famine, the death, the teeth of wild animals, the avenging sword. Notice it's the avenging sword. It takes vengeance for what you've done. Chapter 40. Hard work was created for every man, and a heavy yoke for the sons of Adam, from the day they came forth from their mother's womb until the day they returned to the mother of all. The conception of things to come in the day of death trouble their thoughts and cause fear of heart. From the one sitting on a glorious throne to the one humbled in earth and ashes, from the one wearing purple and a crown to the one clothed in burlap. There is anger, envy, trouble, and unrest, and fear of death, and fury and strife. Right? So everybody who's descended from Adam, one of the things we inherited because of our sinfulness is hard work. Life is not easy. Life is continuously hard and difficult. Right? And we worry about the conception of things to come. We worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. We worry about the future. We worry about death. We're scared of death. And it affects everyone, whether you're the richest man in the world, whether you're the king, or whether you're a beggar. You got the same worries, the same fears, the same, because no amount of wealth can fix it. Verse 5, when it is time for rest on his bed, his night of sleep alters his knowledge. He gets little or no rest, and afterward in his sleep, as though on a day of watch, he is troubled by the vision of his heart, like one who escapes from the face of battle. In the exact time of need he awakes and is amazed there was nothing to fear. With all flesh, from man to animal, and upon sinners 7 times more, there will be death and bloodshed, strife and the sword, distresses and famine, and ruin and affliction. All these things were created for the lawless, and because of them the flood came. Whatever comes from the earth returns to the earth, and whatever comes from the waters returns to the sea. We just took a little visit back to Ecclesiastes. Remember? That what is man's life under the sun? You struggle for a while, and then you die. Right? But what the point he's making is that all of these things that afflict us, whether it's worry, whether it's fear of death, whether it's these actual death, bloodshed, strife, famine, these actual pain and suffering, all of these are the result of us choosing to go down the wrong path. They all have a common cause. Verse 12, every bribe and wrongdoing will be blotted out, but faithfulness shall stand forever. The wealth of the unrighteous will dry up like a river and sound forth and cease like great thunder in the rain. A generous man will rejoice, but transgressors will come to ruin. The offspring of the ungodly shall not grow branches, for they are unclean roots on a hard rock. Weeds growing by any water or riverbank will be plucked out before any grass. Grace is like a paradise in blessing, and almsgiving endures forever. The life of the self-reliant and the worker will be sweet, but he who finds a treasure is better off than both. Having children and building a city establish a name, but a blameless wife is accounted better than both. Wine and music gladden the heart, but love of wisdom is better than both. The flute and harp give sweet melody, but a pleasant tongue is better than both. The eye will desire grace and beauty, but the green shoots of grain are better than both. A friend and companion meet at an appointed time, but a wife meeting with her husband is better than both. Brothers and help are for a time of affliction, but almsgiving rescues better than both. Gold and silver will make the foot secure, but counsel is esteemed more valuable than both. Wealth and strength will lift up the heart, but the fear of the Lord is better than both. There is no loss in the fear of the Lord, and with it there is no need to seek for help. The fear of the Lord is like a paradise of blessing, and covers a man better than any glory. My child, do not live the life of a beggar, for it is better to die than to beg. When a man looks at another's table, he is living an irrational life, for he will pollute his soul with another's food. But a rational and educated man will guard himself against that. Begging will be sweet in the mouth of a shameless man, but in his belly a fire will be kindled. So we see there, that's a little part at the end is sort of the flip side. We've heard a lot about how good it is to give alms, right, and to help the poor. This is the flip side, right? The difference between a poor person and a beggar is that a poor person is out trying to provide for himself and for his family and isn't able to. A beggar is not. A beggar is someone who's just envious of what other people have and want them to give it to him, essentially. Chapter 41. O death, how bitter is the memory of you, to a man at peace with his possessions, to a man without distractions and prosperous in everything, and still strong enough to enjoy his food. Right? When everything's going good, you've got a lot of stuff, You're prospering and everything's good. And then you remember, oh yeah, I'm going to die someday and there's nothing I can do about it. Oh, that's bitter. Right? Oh, that's bitter. Verse 2, O death, your judgment is good to the man in need and failing in strength. In his extreme old age, distracted by everything, and stubborn and short on patience. Right? So that's the flip side. When you're extreme old age and you're sick and you're not doing well, then all of a sudden remembering that this doesn't go on forever, then it doesn't sound so bad. Verse 3, do not fear the judgment of death. Remember those before you and after you. This is the judgment from the Lord to all flesh. And how can you reject the good pleasure of the Most High? Whether you lived 10 or 100 or 1,000 years, there is in Hades no inquiry into your life. The children of sinners are loathsome children, and they frequent the dwellings of the ungodly. The inheritance of the children of sinners will perish, and with their seed the disgrace will continue. The children will blame their godless father, for because of him they will be denounced. Woe to you, the ungodly men who forsook the law of God Most High. And when you are born, you will be born to a curse, and when you die, your portion will be a curse. Whatever is from the earth shall return to the earth, so the ungodly go from a curse to destruction. The mourning of men is about their bodies, but the evil name of sinners will be blotted out. Have regard for your name, for it will remain with you longer than 1,000 great chests of gold. The days of a good life are numbered, but a good name will remain forever. Observe instruction and live in peace, my children, but hidden wisdom and invisible treasure, what benefit are these? A man who hides his foolishness is better than a man who hides his wisdom. So what's he getting at there? Again, this is kind of bleak. But the idea is, remember, what are the big values in the society of the people he's writing to? Number one, living a long time. Right? Living a long time. And number two, having children that carry on your family name and inherit your wealth. So what's he saying? He's saying, number one, it doesn't matter if you live 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years. When you die, you end up in Hades. Right? And it doesn't matter if you have plenty of children to inherit, if those children are ungodly. Right? They're going to perish just like you did. So, again, these things that we value so highly, these same things that are blessings from God, are blessings if we're righteous, but they're a curse if we're unrighteous. Right? Having ungodly children is a curse, not a blessing. Having an ungodly spouse is a curse, not a blessing. Being an ungodly person, for you death is a curse and not a blessing. That's the point he's getting at. These same things are blessing or curse depending on which road we're pursuing. Verse 16, therefore be ashamed on the basis of my word, for it is not good to protect every kind of shame, and not everything is highly esteemed by all with confidence. Be ashamed of fornication before father or mother, of a lie before your leader or ruler, of an offense before a judge or ruler, of lawlessness before the assembly of the people, of wrongdoing before your partner or friend, of theft in the place where you dwell. Be ashamed before the truth of God and his covenant, and of bad manners at the table, of contemptuous behavior in receiving and giving, of silence before those who greet you, of looking at a prostitute, of rejecting the appeal of a kinsman, of carrying off someone's portion or gift, and of staring at another man's wife, of meddling with his maidservant, and do not come near her bed. Be ashamed of insulting words before friends, and do not be insulting after making a gift, of repeating and telling what you hear and revealing secrets. So be truly modest and find favor before every man. He's referring to here, I've referred to this before, St. John Chrysostom says when it comes to being ashamed, we have it reversed. When we go out and sin, we're fine, and then when the time comes to go to confession, then we're embarrassed. Right? This is how it should be. We should be embarrassed to sin. Right? We should be embarrassed to do these things. Right? And then when the time comes to confess, we should be glad to be free of them. To be rid of them. Yeah.
Before you go on, back
Sure.
to 39, where it says there are spirits created for vengeance.
Yeah.
Who created those spirits?
God.
God didn't create bad spirits too?
Yeah. The unclean spirits or demons or whatever we...
Well, I thought that was because they fell.
Yeah, but God created them.
But he created them good. They chose.
Right, because remember the same things in that passage, the same things become good or evil to you.
For us.
Depending on your orientation. Right? And we're going to see, as we get into Daniel, as we get into Revelation, we're going to see some of those destructive spirits. Chapter 42. Do not be ashamed of the following things, and do not let partiality lead you to sin. Of the law and covenant of the Most High, and of a judgment to acquit an ungodly man. Of keeping accounts with a partner or a traveling companion, and of dividing an inheritance among friends. Of accurate scales and balances, and the acquisition of much or little. Of profit from business with merchants, and of much discipline of children. And of making the sides of an evil servant bleed. That's a little cultural. But that's discipline.
Yeah.
The idea is your servant, you're responsible for your servant. Right? So if your servant is going down this path for destruction and you don't do anything, right? You're responsible for his fate. So the idea is better to discipline him, even beat him now to get him back in line, right? Then let him go his own way and get to destruction. Verse 6, where there is an evil wife, a seal is good, and where there are many hands, lock things up. Whatever you deliver, do it by number or weight, and put it in writing everything you give or receive. Do not be ashamed of the instructing of the unwise and foolish, or of the extremely old man who passes judgment on the young. Then you'll be truly instructed and approved before all men. Meaning when you're doing right, and of your faith, and of your beliefs, those are the things you shouldn't be ashamed of. Right? Those are the things other people should know about. Other people should know about you if you're in business that you deal fairly with people. Right? That shouldn't be a secret. Other people should know about you that you're a Christian. Other people should know about you that you discipline your children and that you have a good family. Right? These are all things that you shouldn't be embarrassed of. Verse 9, a daughter keeps her father secretly wakeful, for worry over her takes away his sleep. Lest in her youth she passes the time to marry, and lest in her marriage she be hated. In her virginity lest she be defiled or become pregnant in her father's house. Having a husband lest she be unfaithful, or though married lest she be childless. Keep a strict watch over a headstrong daughter, lest she make you a laughingstock to your enemies, a source of gossip in the city and notorious among the people, and a disgrace to you before the great multitude. I personally don't have a daughter. But watching my dad and my sisters, this is probably pretty accurate in terms of the worry that accompanies having a daughter. Verse 12, do not look upon anyone for beauty, and do not sit in the midst of women. For a moth comes out of garments, and the evil of a woman comes from a woman. The evil of a man is better than a woman who does what is good, yet brings shame and disgrace. The idea is, if he's speaking to men,
Yeah.
right? He's speaking of men, and he's saying, especially young men, right? Don't go trying to hang around with women, just women who you think are pretty, right? Because one thing's going to lead to another. One thing's going to lead to another, and before you know it, see, the woman. It's the woman who does what is good. The woman's innocent, right? It's not holding the woman to blame. What is good, but brings shame and disgrace because of what the man does with her, right? He's led astray by being with her by his own urges, by his own lust, and even though she is a perfectly decent nice woman, he's now. So it's better for him to go and hang around men, even men who are kind of up to no good, than to go and hang around women and be led astray. That's what it's getting. So now there's we're going to talk about, there's basically three sections left in the book. Okay? We've got this part that starts here in verse 15 of chapter 42 and goes until the end of chapter 43, okay? Which is going to be another sort of semi-psalm talking about creation. Then chapters 44 through 50, we've talked before, back in Wisdom of Solomon, writing half in Greek. Anamnesis, remembering together. We've talked about the memories of the saints, the way they remember. There's this passage from 44 to 50 that is going to be going back through people we've already read about in the history of Israel and talking about their memory, particularly as it pertains to wisdom, how they relate to wisdom. And then chapter 51, the last chapter, is going to be another sort of psalm. That passage here at the end. So this is what I was talking about when I said we're going to have some changes in genre coming up here at the end. This anamnesis passage is one we're more familiar with. It's in the same kind of style. It's probably Hebrews 11, right? Where St. Paul goes back and goes to the history of talking about faith, right? By faith Abraham, by faith Moses, by faith, right? And he sort of leaves off, and he says time fails to keep going through. Well, time doesn't fail Yeshua Ben-Sirach. He goes for a whole 7 chapters. That's talking about wisdom, but it's the same kind of idea. It's this kind of remembering together these figures with a particular theme. In this case, wisdom. In the case of Hebrews 11, faith. Okay, so we'll get there in just a minute here. So 42 verse 15. I shall now remember the works of the Lord, and by the words of the Lord I shall describe his works that I see. Notice the word remember right there in the beginning as we start to talk about creation. The sun gives light and looks down on everything, and its work is full of the Lord's glory. The Lord did not enable his saints to describe all his wonders, which the Lord Almighty established, that the universe might be established in his glory. He traced out the abyss and the human heart and understands their craftiness. For the Most High possesses all knowledge and sees into the signs of an age. He proclaims what has been and what shall be, and reveals the footstep of hidden things. No thought escapes him, not even one word is hidden from him. He has adorned the mighty works of his wisdom, for he is from everlasting to everlasting. Nothing can be added or taken away, and he needs no one to be his counselor. How precious are all his works, now sparkling to behold. All these things live and endure forever, for every need, and all are obedient. All things are in pairs, one opposite the other, and he made nothing incomplete. One thing strengthens the good of another, and who can have enough of beholding his glory? The exaltation of the heavenly heights is the firmament of purity, the form of heaven with the vision of glory. The sun, when it appears, making proclamation as it goes forth, is a wonderful instrument, a work of the Most High. At noon it dries up the land, and who can endure its burning heat? A man kindling a furnace works in burning heat, but the sun burns the mountains 3 times as much. Breathing out fiery streams and sending forth shining beams, it dims the eyes. Great is the Lord who made it, and by his command it hastens its journey. He also made the moon to serve in its season, as a declaration of times and an everlasting sign. From the moon comes the sign of a feast, a light that wanes as it completes its course. The month is named according to the moon, being increased wondrously in its phases, a vessel encamped on high, shining in the firmament of heaven. The glory of the stars is the beauty of heaven, a world shining in the high places of the Lord. By the words of the Holy One they stand according to his judgment, and do not grow weary in their watches. Behold the rainbow, and bless him who made it, exceedingly beautiful in its brightness. It circles heaven with its glorious arc, and the hands of the Most High laid out its course. By his command he makes the snow to fall and speeds the lightning by his judgment. Therefore the storehouses are opened and the clouds fly forth like birds. By his majesty he condenses the clouds and the hailstones break into pieces. At his appearing the mountains are shaken, and by his will the south wind blows. The voice of his thunder makes the earth tremble, and so do the hurricane from the north and the whirlwind as well. He sprinkles the snow like birds flying down, and its descent is like grasshoppers alighting. The eye marvels at the beauty of its whiteness, and the heart is astonished at its raining down. He pours the hoarfrost like salt upon the earth, and when it freezes it becomes like pointed thorns. The cold north wind blows, and ice freezes on the water, and forms on every pool of water, and clothes the water like armor. He consumes the mountains and burns up the desert, and withers the green herbage like fire. A mist quickly heals it all, and falling dew brings refreshment from the heat. By his reasoning he quieted the great deep and planted islands in it. Those who sail the sea recount its dangers, and we are amazed at the reports coming to our ears. For therein are the incredible and wondrous works, a diversity of many living things, and a created order of huge sea creatures. Because of him his messenger has a prosperous journey, and by his word all things are held together. We will say many things and not reach the end, but the sum of our words is seen in this: he is the all. How shall we ever be able to adequately praise him? For he is greater than all his works. Fearful is the Lord and exceedingly great, and wondrous is his power. Glorify the Lord and exalt him as much as you are able, for he will surpass even that. And when you exalt him, put forth all your strength. Do not grow weary, for you cannot exalt him enough. Who has seen him and will describe him, and who can magnify him as he truly is? There are yet many hidden things greater than these, for we have seen but few of his works. For the Lord made all things and gives wisdom to the godly. Right, so, remember we talked about how wisdom, one of the basic ideas of what wisdom is understanding the way things in the creation, the created world, and in ourselves work. Right? Well, why this is so important is after Yeshua Ben-Sirach recounts to us all these things he's discovered, all this wisdom about how people work, about how he works, about how families work, about how cultures work, societies work, cities work, the way creation works, where does he end up? He ends up saying, in reality, the works of God, just in the things he's created, are beyond what I can comprehend and describe and understand. Let alone trying to describe and understand him. Right? Because all these wondrous things we see are but a fraction. Right? Are but a fraction of what he's created and what he's done.
My question is this in a theological term. What you have just said, I very much agree. So instead of having all these creeds, as an example, wouldn't it be easier and better just to say, I believe?
Well, you have believe is a transitive verb. It requires an object.
Believe in what?
It requires an object of belief.
That's why the creed.
Well, when you say, that's right, we have the creed, which I understand, like the Apostles, I'm more familiar with the Apostles' Creed, which is a nice thing to teach the people of your history and everything of the church. Okay? But then when you get into it and you get older and so forth, or maybe even perhaps younger, saying, yes, I believe in God. And that way you would not get into certain, I'm sorry.
No. See, this, Mr. Bill, is why you are, in fact, really at heart Orthodox.
What?
And not a Protestant.
Don't be doing that.
Because,
I tried to join last week.
because your Protestant brethren fill books with doctrinal statements and systematic theologies. Right? Trying to nail everything down.
Right.
Whereas the Orthodox Church has always taken the exact opposite approach. Right? The word dogma, the original meaning. No, the original meaning of the word, it was a rock. It was a rock that marked the boundary of your property.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And So when the Orthodox Church, on the few occasions when we've issued a dogma, which would be the 7 ecumenical councils, where we made dogmatic statements, what the Orthodox Church is doing is they're setting those boundary markers.
What's
Right.
the last time that they did issue one?
843 AD.
They don't get them big birds.
So they're marking stones, right? So when it comes to Christ, we can't define the incarnation and understand it. It's a mystery.
Absolutely.
It's a mystery. But we can say, if you say Jesus is half God and half man, that's wrong, right? So okay, here's a marker. If you can't go down that way. And if you say he's just God and not man, well, that's wrong, right? So you can't go off that way. And if we say he's just man and not God, well, that's wrong too, right? And so what we're doing is we're putting these boundary markers, not to define exactly what the incarnation, because we can't, but to say, if you go off in one of these directions, right, it's going to make you finding salvation a whole lot harder. Because that's what we're protecting with these dogmas. We're protecting the way of salvation. We're protecting this. Right? We're protecting this. Try to keep you off of this. And so, what we do, this is why when you read them, you'll see anathemas. You'll see, this is wrong. But you don't see systematic statements of, here's how Christ's atonement works. Or here's how the incarnation works. Or here's how the Eucharist works. Right? We don't do that. We say, well, okay, that's wrong over here, and that's wrong over here. And this is, as long as you're in here, right, you're where you need to be, right, to continue to work out your salvation. Which is where I think you were trying to go, and is why you're Orthodox at heart. You should just sign up.
Well, I think also,
Should I sing Just As I Am? You can come.
He was ready to come.
Yeah.
I said, I can't do it right now. And he says, oh, man, I'm out of here.
you can give me next week.
Okay.
I told you.
But let me ask you this.
Okay.
Think this way, then. I would pose this question to you. Both of you, really. Because I know Father Scott has read much about Chief Joseph, and we've discussed that. And I like what Chief Joseph says because it pertains to organized religion, okay? Because, as you know, I've studied a little bit about it, and used at certain points, I think they do that to get you into their type of thinking and to really recite certain things. They say we don't make cookies, but you can be different
Yeah.
an individual, but you better do this.
Yeah. Better be round and flat and sugary. Yeah.
Chief Joseph on his reservation, the white man comes to him. And he says, we're going to build a church on your reservation. And he says, no, you're not. And they said, why? He says, it will teach us to argue about God. And the book that I'm reading on the Native American Indians and their wisdom and their knowledge of God and their spirituality, we go back to that, is absolutely phenomenal. Because how they look at us in a materialistic world, the yellow dust, gold, how important it is to do. But of their freedom, their love of the land, and so forth. So when I look at this, and I look at all of these rules and regulations, I wonder if I ran around with Jesus 2,000 plus years ago, would that really be what we're studying now to be Christ-like or Christian, if you would? That is my question.
Well, there's certainly elements of that. There are points of God. We don't. This is go back to Saint Irenaeus of Lyon in the 2nd century.
I don't think that's fair because I didn't study.
We say we know where the Holy Spirit is because He's told us. We don't know where He isn't. Okay. So the way of salvation is it's been revealed to us in the Scriptures, in the church. That's what we look at and that's what we teach. Right? I'm not going to go and say Chief Joseph, Native Americans, well, they're not doing the exact, so they all went to hell or
But
something,
they're
or
certainly
whatever,
not savages as we label.
or whatever, right? I'm not going to do that. I don't know. I know God was dealing with the Native Americans long before the Europeans came to
Yes.
North and South America, and I know that He's going to judge them just like He's going to judge me, right? And I know I'm going to be judged more harshly because I've been given more in terms of knowledge, in terms of the Scriptures, in terms of this than they were. Right? But I really can't say anything about how God's going to judge them. This is St. Paul says, who are you to judge another man's servant? Right? It's not your job to do performance reviews for other people's employees. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't say, we're not, you have to go out and condemn them to say that we're right. Mm-hmm. Right? We know from the tradition we've received that we're right. But that doesn't necessarily make everyone else wrong and bad. Right? So the approach, I would think, like with St. Herman when he got to Alaska and was dealing with the Aleutians there and that kind of thing,
Yes.
would have been closer to St. Paul's approach, where he comes and says, I saw you have the unknown God. Well, here, I happen to know about him. Right? Here we go. Or in Athens, where he quotes pagan poets. They're actually talking about Zeus, if you go and take the quotes in context. But he says, you wrote these things, you thought that they're not really about Zeus. Here's what they're really about.
Alaska,
right? I would think that was probably St. Herman's approach to them as well. It wasn't you all are heathens going to hell. You better get rid of your savagery and accept my Russian wisdom, or you're all going to go to hell. I don't think that was his approach.
Yeah, here's where you have elements of the truth, and let me flesh them out.
Right. Here's how God's been revealing Himself to you. Let me give you the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey. Right. Okay. So I think we're going to run a little long tonight, but not too long, because I think we can in not too much more time finish the book here. So chapter 44, we start this part where we're going to be going back to people who are better. And what's interesting to observe here is, remember, this is how they're remembered. This is how they're remembered. We're going to know a lot of dirt, a lot of tabloid content from their life, from having read about their life. But watch how they're remembered. Right? Chapter 44, verse 1. Let us now praise honored men and our fathers. The Lord established His great glory and majesty from the beginning through them. There were those who ruled in their kingdoms and were men renowned for their power, giving counsel through their understanding and proclaiming prophecies. There were leaders of the people by their counsels and understanding of learning for the people, wise in their words of instruction. There were composers of music, and they set forth verse and writing. Wealthy men with great resources, living in peace in their dwelling places. All these were honored in their generations, and in their days were a source of boasting. There were those who left behind a name that men might declare their praises. There were also those whom no one remembers, who perished as if they never existed, and they died as if they had not been born, and so have their children after them. Nevertheless, these were men of mercy, whose righteousness lives with God. The good they did remains with their seed, and their inheritance with their children's children. Their seed stands with the covenants, and their children as well for their sake. Their seed shall remain forever, and their glory will not be blotted out. Their bodies were buried in peace, and their name lives to all generations. People will tell of their wisdom, and the assembly will proclaim their praise. So what he's getting at there is, we remember these people. There's also a whole lot of saints who we don't necessarily remember. Right? And why is that? Well, the Orthodox Church teaches the reason we don't recognize the saints among us is because of our own sinfulness. So there have been saints in every generation who we just clean missed because we were so blinded by our own sin that we couldn't tell that we had this holy person living in our midst. But the point being, God remembers them. Right? And while we may not remember them, and while they might not have a family dynasty, their reward is with God. He knows them, even if we don't. And passages like this, and Hebrews 11, are good places to take people who come to you and who don't understand saints. A lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters will be like, well, why do you have all these saints? Why don't you just have Jesus? Well, most of the Bible is the Old Testament. And while, as we've been going through, I've been trying to show that the Old Testament is really mostly about Jesus. If you want to be literal, they're not stories about Jesus. That would be the Gospels. Right? Those would be stories. They're stories about other people. Right? Other people who weren't God, who weren't Jesus, who lived and died, but who through their lives reveal Christ to us. That's why we read about their lives in the Old Testament. Right? Same way in the book of Acts, Jesus ascends into heaven right at the beginning. The rest of it is about St. Peter, St. Paul, right? St. Philip, St. Stephen, right? Because in their lives, they reveal Christ to us. So most of the Bible is not literally stories about Jesus. It's only stories about Jesus in the sense that these people's lives and the way they lived them reveal Christ to us. So in the same way, there are men and women in every generation of Christians who the way they live their lives reveals Christ to us. Whether it's St. Nicholas in the 4th century, whether it's St. Raphael in the 20th century, the way they live their lives reveals Jesus to us. So it's not them in addition to Jesus, or instead of Jesus, or between us and Jesus, right? They're part of how we see Jesus and who He is.
When the schism happened, is that when the saints separated? There's nobody after the schism that's venerated in both the Roman and the Orthodox.
Well, it gets tricky later on. Officially, whatever that means. Well, what officially means in this case is on the official calendars of the Russian and Greek churches. You don't find any saints who are post 1054.
At all?
At all.
Like not St. Raphael?
On the no. Any Western saints,
Oh,
any from the Church of Rome. You don't find any Western saints until after 1054. After 1054. Now there is a lot of private veneration. There are a lot of people who are like right on the edge, who are sort of accepted. But if you want official on paper, on the calendar of the saints. Now, more recently, Rome has added some of the Eastern saints to their calendar, or approved them for veneration in the Eastern Rite Catholic churches. So that's where it starts getting fuzzy. Including like St. Gregory Palamas, who I was talking about earlier, who sort of was arguing against which makes it weird. But so there's a number of weird things when you get into the official calendar. You look at the Western calendar, Joan of Arc is a saint now, and she was burned to death as a heretic by the church, so I don't know what you do with that. That's sort of. But so, that's if you want to go by the calendars, that's official. Unfortunately, I do know of a couple. But I don't know of any serious Orthodox theologians who believe that God has not been at work in Western Europe, for example, for 1,000 years. Right. It would say that there's no holiness, there's no... But in terms of officially putting people on the calendar, that's the cutoff. That's the cutoff. So, that's the... Okay. So, chapter 44, verse 16. Enoch pleased the Lord and was translated as an example of repentance for all generations. Right?